Good morning. I expect you are well now. I apologize for my English. I expect you will understand me. If not, I will be available all the week. You can ask me questions. In my presentation, the presentation will be very interdisciplinary because the topic presenting rock art of this area is very wide. So you have selected just some aspects and questions, but everything has been published in books or articles. So this bibliography and documentation is available if you need. We can share all that. So the topics of this presentation, the Pleistocene of the rock art of this area, Pleistocene rock art, and I will speak about the history, the discovery, the chronological position, because that's very important, because it's totally different to understand, to speak about rock art from a very far past, from long time, and not from very recent or modern period, and some specific issues at the same time. So the topics I will present you progressively are this one. I will speak about the main characteristic of the rock art of this area. It's a prehistoric rock art. What we call prehistoric, it's a very strange name because it refers to the history, to the writing, etc. So we prefer to speak about chronological aspect, Pleistocene art, Pleistocene rock art of this area. Then I will speak about and try to give you some information, general and global information about mediation issues in Europe and how they are totally different from Southern Africa, and different also from the places where there is a lot of rock art site discarded in the landscape and not concentrated in some places and in the cave, in the underground. Third, the issues of the in situ visit, access, and mediation to the site is something specific also here, because the sites are concentrating often in caves, and caves are small places where it's necessary to control the climate effect of the people inside. Then hypothesis about the significance. I will be very interdisciplinary, sometimes with some theoretical aspect, but I will be short and very global for this part, because a lot of hypotheses since what century of and a half has been developed and offered, and they change and they evolve. And then as a brief synthesis, how today it's possible and what kind of mediation and opening of and how to share rock art with the future, with the society today. Rock art in Europe. The rock art of this area for Paleolithic and Pleistocene period is distributed in all the continent, but the main concentration is in western part where you are today, where there is a huge concentration of rock art site in the Western Europe, in Portugal, Spain, and France. Very few in Italy, and rare some other. Even you have some in Russia with Kapova and Kalguti. Here it's the Altai, here it's the Ural Mountains, and then. But this is only for Pleistocene rock art, because you have more recent rock art on all these surface and continent. And you have hundreds, thousands of sites, but of more recent periods, usually from Holocene or more recent and Bronze Age. A lot of them are distributed. Generally all the landscape, but with a concentration in the places where they are well preserved. There are the mountains, in the mountains, and last 3 months ago there were a concentration of rock art discovered since several years in the Pamir, but now they discovered a lot of sites above 4,000 meters in altitude in Pamir. So very high altitude with paintings and engravings, but of recent period. So now we will consider this wide surface, because you see more than 6,000 kilometers from Foshkoa to Kalgoorlie, for example. Most of this rock art is on Rochester in caves, but some of rock art is in open air, like in your countries, for example, in Spain and Portugal. Portugal here, you can see the ibexes here. In the Ural, it's possible to have some caves, and there are several caves. You will see an exhibition about this this Shulgantash cave in Ruffignac, visiting Ruffignac this afternoon in Russia, and sites also concentrated in the glacial surface in the high plateau of Altai, but it's also the same for recent period in the mountain, in the Alps in all Western Europe. This Pleistocene Eurasian rock art, or European rock art, is a period of Paleolithic, and it's Pleistocene art. That means it's from this period that we call, from Paleolithic culture, the Upper Paleolithic, a period between 45,000 and 8,000. 8,000 is the end of the glacial period. It's Holocene, and climate is changing. Everything is changing. So this art is the art of glacial period. And this is very important to understand. So this art, as you know, as I said, is embedded in the concept of long time. So a time immemorial. It's totally impossible to have any access to understand directly with some knowledge, memory, legacy, history, cultural heritage to the knowledge. The knowledge of is only coming from archaeological research, from science analysis, and this is very, very specific to study the very distant past. In considering and studying it, it's important to take in account a very important break in time between the authors, between the artists of this Paleolithic art and us today. It's totally different. When we study more recent period, like is in Bronze Age or historical art, is possible. But here, it's really impossible. So you have to be very cautious and to examine with a scientific methodology all the knowledge about the context of this art. At the same time, the history, the development of this rock art is recent. The archaeology, the prehistory, the identification, the beginning, the birth of this rock art on the point of scientific point of view is not longer than 150 years, the beginning of the last century. So this rock art is associated to glacial periods, and it's just at a very recent moment here between around 40,000, 45,000 and 12,000, that there is a development in this area of this art, of this glacial art, the art of this ice time. This is very specific. It's a reason why studying art or artistic expression for the past is necessary to date it, to approach it with datation. So the dating system, the dating methodology of rock art in this area, as everywhere also, is very important and evolving every day with new method, and that's very important. For example, sometimes we are very lucky with the cave, the Chauvet cave, because charcoal has been used to make the painting, so it's very easy to have direct dating, even if it's absolute dating, and this is the reason why with a very micro sample of charcoal on the painting, it's possible to get dates, and these dates give the age of 36,000 and before present calibrated. So our knowledge and our global perspective of this rock art is on this figure. You have all the main rock art, and you will visit some of them in this area, are organized from the first Chauvet cave and then to the more recent Assyrian. Here you have the Paleolithic, Upper Paleolithic culture as Aurignacian, Gravettian, Solutrean, Magdalenian. You will have all these chronological cultures and division of the Paleolithic time in mind. You will hear visiting the cave. You will people will spoke about Gravettian or Solutrean, etc. So it's a long time, and this time. And this system of rock art and also of culture here, the beginning of a culture and the end, are reconstruction, scientific reconstruction with a lot of data, with a lot of document. That's important. So the discovery of rock art, authentication of rock art. It was very important to authentify it here, to identify that there were these extinct species present associated with artifacts, with human remains, with tools, etc. But to authentify that there were art also. Because at this moment, the paleontology was also at its beginning. The anatomical human were not discovered, so it was difficult to identify rock art. Is it recent or is it old? So it was very important. And this is a meeting in the beginning of the other century. And in this area, you have main archaeologists, and as Nathalie was speaking about the founder, the author of this museum here, Denis Peyroni is here, and here is a priest, and this Henri Breuil. Henri Breuil worked in this area, but also in South Africa, other area, and his dressing are very famous. So it's a recent science. It's a recent science, and we have not a lot of feedback about it. It's important. So in this area, we have a concentration of rock art, not in open land, but in caves and rock shelter. And it's important to think a moment, why in caves? What happened in cave? What is specific to caves? What is a global knowledge about cave art? It's clear that rock shelter and painted cave are no place where people were living. They were going in the darkness to paint. There is not only painting, you have painting, engraving, sculpture, sometimes clay modeling, organization in the space. You have all these elements. They were exploring the underground world, maybe for explaining things in a totally different way than at the sun surface. At the same time, the caves illustrate the passage of time over tens of thousands of years of environmental and cultural change. So the information in the caves, in the stratigraphy of the caves, are a knowledge about the variation of the life, of the way of life of this past population in the stratigraphy study by the archaeology, but also the change of the environment. It's the reason why what is in the cave, on the panels, but also in the stratigraphy, is a real reserve of knowledge for the past. And archaeology is not a renewable research. So it's important to keep these researches for new generation and for future investigation. So rock art is very fragile in its original settings, and that's important. The second aspect, and all that will be organized more and more, the mediation issues in Europe are totally different from other country, from your country, for the reason why it's a lot of sites are underground, and because also we are in northern hemisphere and we were in glacial context. So this environmental condition changed also the perspective of the interpretation of rock art and also the preservation of rock art. European rock art, it's a name for this artistic expression. It was clear that all these expression manifestations were not art, but we call it artistic expression. And also at the same time, we have any links between this expression and modern people. We don't know the reason why of this rock art. So you have to analyze it and to have only hypotheses, few hypotheses. Mediation issues are different from those because it's old, it's from the long time and different environment. Rock art sites in Southern Africa are found both in open air and rock shelters, but they are very abundant in the landscape. Here, this heritage, cultural heritage of rock art is in France and Spain and Portugal, no more than 500 caves. It's not a lot. Much important part is missing, of course, but it's difficult to imagine how much were present. This is only the preserved part. But at the same time, you have a lot of archaeological sites in open air. You have 10,000 of sites only in France in surface excavated, but not with art, not with rock art at the same time. So the challenges of preservation are different. To understand rock art is necessary for all these reasons to consider all the knowledge accumulated about the material culture from the archaeology, from 1.5 centuries of archaeology, of material culture, of all the aspects of material culture, the tools, implements in flint, in bone, in mammoth ivory, also the representation on mobile art, also the burials, etc., the lamps, the grease lamp, the adornments. All these elements give us the frame, the structure, and at the same time the material funding the base of an interpretation of the rock art, because we have a good knowledge with this context of the way of life. At the same time, from the past, from this period, the artistic expression of two types. Here, there are sites where we have a lot of information from archaeology, but also with mobile art. There is rock art, and at the same time there are mobile art. All these expressions, both are linked. It's impossible to analyze one alone. Paleolithic rock art is composed on the walls by engraving, imaging, sculpture, paintings, engravings, a lot of aspects, but all of them graphics. At the same time, it's important to think of what we look. It's clear all this rock art is dominating on the graphic aspect by the presence of animals. So there are, you can see here, it's a tracing from Henri Breuil, made at the beginning of last century after the discovery of the cave of Fondegom. You will visit Fondegom, and this is a tracing. You see the animals, but these animals are clearly symbols from the original animal present. As we spoke of this method of reconstructing the past, of interpreting the past, and to represent the past for us, and to transmit it, we need to be conscious that the natural world gives the information to these artists. They have selected some species, only some, a very strong selection, intentional selection, but made by the culture and from the tradition. But there are symbols, But as we are speaking in human sciences, animals here, graphic, are symbols from the original life, but they are symbol of what? And this is a difficulty. In material sciences, in mathematics or in physics, you have a symbol, but the symbol has a clear definition. If you have not a definition, it's a symbol of a symbol. And at the end, what that means. And this the reason why it's very difficult to try to give an interpretation. What is clear is some very strong evidences. For example, the representation very roughly of the horses from all the surface of this Europe, or on all the 600 kilometers of distance. There is a family in the representation of the horse, and this representation, this is a strong rule. This stability of the narrative forms are stable for 25,000 years without any change or very small change. It's very easy to identify the forms. When we discovered a rock art painting in the Urals or in the Siberian plateau in Altai, it's clearly horse. They are made with the same rules, graphic rules. That's important to keep in mind. So in the cave are represented some animal species. Not a lot of them has been represented, around 12, 15 maximum. They have selected ungulate, living in groups, in big, very large surfaces, and herds of very large number. Some species disappeared, like woolly rhino, the lions, but you see at the same time, it's delicate and is very, the attention to represent the physiognomy, the anatomy of the animals, that's very important. But at the same time, mixed among all these animal naturalistic representation, you have the imagination everywhere present. This animal never exists. It's a composition from different animals. It's clearly a mammal, a quadruped, something, but it's totally different from the horse here and to the horse here, painted before. You see? At the same time, you have a lot of graphic signs. We have lost the knowledge of these forms, but they are present and in large number associated. You see that, like a bird, a butterfly, etc. In a cave, for example, the Chauvet cave is 300 meters long. You have painting in red, painting in dark, or engravings, etc. You see the representation of the wall, the organization. So there is a spatial organization often in the cave, and this very strong organization and very important of the meaning. For example, in this cave, in the Chauvet cave, there is not only paintings on the wall. On the walls, you have a socialite landscape. All the cave has been organized. So you have the organization in the landscape, for example, some bones, animals, bear skulls deposited. You have the staging of the animals with the bones, playing with the bone, what we can call biosymbolism. You have the engravings on the walls, so they represent white representation. They use ochre, is red color, and they use charcoal in dark color, and also organization of the floor. So it's a wide diversity of expressions. So why they come in caves and why they painted them? Very shortly, it's a place below the surface of the earth, very unfamiliar, a place without light, where it's necessary to have a domestication of the light to go inside, to create the life. It's also a place occupied by hyenas or bears, etc. So it's a conflict, and you have to be very intelligent to survive to such carnivores. It's a problem of the light, in the darkness, and there is a lot of technology to produce light. And it's clearly a place where it's more easy than in the surface, in front of the sun, in the shadow, to represent forms and to create life. The animal figures are also the result of very deep use of language tradition, and the use of myths and a sophisticated language. Animal figuralism is animals are exclusively selected. Some mammals with very specific behavior, collective behavior, and a very specific central neuroorganization also at the same time. The animal presence synthesize all the meaning of the Paleolithic cave art. These animals are very specific, associated between them. There are rules of association. But among all these animals, the human figures, animal and human figures, are often metonymic. They are part of them. And when you use in a language and in a speech, in a discourse, just a word or short words to evocate a large sentence or expression, it's a testimony that you use very clearly your language, and you can evocate with only one word a sentence. This is a metonymy. When you use metonymy in the language, as today, or here in the past before, with just a part of an animal to evocate the presence of all the animals, is the demonstration of very deep language and the representation of a figure with only a part of this animal. It was an example here, you see. This is a metonymic expression. Human is not presented, just a hand. It's not a mammoth complete, it's just a line evocating the mammoth. This is a metonymic representation, but a speech and a discourse at the same time. And here you have the lower part of a female body with a pubian triangle here, embedded in a bison, in a bison in bipedal position and in a lioness. This is often the situation when human is presented in rock art as metonymy, part only of it. It's exceptional. You will visit not the original Lascaux cave, but the copy. And in the copy, there is this representation on the only interaction between animal and human. And you see that in this place, from the apse of Lascaux, you will see the copy of this painting. You see how the bison is very naturalistic. He is wounded with a lance, with a spear, and in front of it, is it a human being or something different? It's clearly a therianthrope. It's a mix between animal and human, as you have in your country. It's generally present in all the rock art also here, and it's important to keep that in mind. Third, the issue and the protection. The rock art sites are every time in specific landscape for the main site. For example, the Chauvet cave is associated to a specific meander and geomorphological structure along the Ardèche Valley. You see this arch. There is not a lot of arch in Western Europe associating in this arch. You see the arch here. And the Chauvet cave is on this place in the cliff. So the landscape play a very important role in the interpretation, localization, and the meaning of the rock art. The caves also have been habitated and occupied by animals, dangerous animals like bear, for example. So the question of the visit of the cave in situ in this area is totally constrained by the human presence in the cave. The caves are small surfaces, small volume often. When the caves are huge, like Rouffignac you will visit, it's not a problem of the human presence. You have to control it, but thousands of visitors can, hundreds of visitors can stay at the same time in a cave. But in cave as Altamira or Lascaux, and there are some problems for them at the beginning of the last century, we discovered very quickly that the human presence were too high, and we have climatic disease with temperature, with carbon dioxide, but at the same time the development of microorganisms of the wall with the light. So it is a problem. So it's the reason why for the visit in situ of the cave here, it's very controlled, and we need to have a control of the climate, of the biology, etc. And all the caves are monitored for the control of these parameters, physical parameters, biological parameters, etc. And the history of the cave of Altamira and Lascaux are very, very important. But in front of this problem, very quickly in the 80s, the development of facsimiles has been made, and we have in this area a lot of beautiful facsimiles. They are very expensive, long to build and to construct with different solutions, and we will have a presentation of the Chauvet cave, for example. With Chauvet too, I think Cosquer is missing in this list because Cosquer cave near Marseille has also a facsimile. The hypothesis about the signification of rock art in front of this art is necessary to try to found interpretation. Since the last century, a lot of interpretation have been developed. In Western Europe, we have, with the rock art, also the knowledge of all the mobile art and also of 3D representation in statuette of animals, but also of human. This is a female representation, and this is a male representation, but again, a teranthropic representation. It's a lion, bipedal lion, it's a lion man. So this is important components of the rock art. At the same time, we cannot give and develop an interpretation only of the rock art without the knowledge, for example, of the human-female representation, very homogeneous on all the Western Europe at a period of the gravation period between 25 and 30,000. It's possible to classify the different hypotheses and interpretation as well. The first use was a naturalistic representation of the world, a copy of the world, like in art. It was at the beginning of the 19th century. Then rock art is just for the pleasure to produce art. It's an artwork. It's also from the 12th century, beginning of the 12th century. More recently, it has been identified and developed a lot of theories from semiology and linguistic perspective as a graphic thing. And these theories are very important. They represent a good development of the cognitive knowledge of the rock art. It could be also a marking place in the territory. And there are the studies in South African rock art, Australian rock art that develop this conception of a social landscape with marking place, the marking of places. And it's also, it could be simply an object, a material object, a technical process. It could be also a social production. And most of the social anthropology theories come from this field. Structuralism, shamanism, and mythology are very important. And the mythology is one aspect, one of the recent rediscovery, because this this field has been more recently developed. The mythology, the study of the myths in literature, in social anthropology, and you have scholars like Jean-Michel GENESTE or Julien Duy with books, specific books, and also it could be it's more social, psychosocial theory. In anthropology, agency is broadly defined as a socially, culturally mediating capacity of to act. And this is important because it's more complex interpretation of the place of rock art in a landscape. But more easily, it's there is another way to look at the rock art. It's necessary to come back to the Pleistocene period. Here it's the Western Europe, but it's a biomass mass. It's just a classification of the different capacity to accept animal population of this period. So in this landscape, Northern Hemisphere, there is a lot of people, a lot of animals. The population of ungulate is very high, but the population is what you can see here. The reconstruction of the human population for this period, even the more recent use is no more than 5,000 on all this surface at origination period, 40,000. So very few human in this landscape. The result here, the animal presence is very important in this northern and glacial hemisphere at all the population. It's very huge, it's important and diverse among species. So this is important. Very high biodiversity, very rich animals, so very rich offer for the resource, for the survival, for the life, and for hunting, for these hunter-gatherers. But these human hunter-gatherers were very few. The perspective today is 9 humans for 1,000 square kilometers. The place where we are now in Périgord is now 1,000 kilometers. So it was at origination period or Upper Paleolithic, no more and less than 100 people. So the interaction, the development, and the progress were very low, and it's a reason why there was a strong stability in the rules, in the technologies, and also in the representation. At the recent Paleolithic, at the end of this period, of the glacial period, but at a moment where temperature was very cold, a light glacial maximum, it was no more in the best perspective of 12,000 humans in all this territory. In this long time, it's necessary now to consider what has built the structure of the humankind and how the tradition has been transformed with myths. It's important here. In the center of all these hypotheses and interpretation to remember that social anthropologists since the end of the 50s, in the 60s, repeat that all the myths observed in all the surface of the world, in the different hunter-gatherer societies, come from period a few 100,000 years ago. This is just citation of Claude Lévi-Strauss from French structuralist in anthropology. And he repeat, but he's not alone. He was, for them, the roots and the origin of the representation and the myths used with animals, but myths about the origin of human or origin of the world. These two kinds, cosmogonic and anthropogonic myths, come from very old period, before the Sapiens era, with people and humankind as Homo erectus and Homo neanderthalensis. And that's because they have contact as hunters with animals, a knowledge and the matter. And this is very important. You, from the countries where you have a very important wildlife, you have a more you can be more conscious of the importance and the influence of your mind and your interpretation of the presence of the wild animals. This is important. This is about the stability. As a brief synthesis, some issues. Today, the issues of the development and how to present rock art in Europe is not only by a work, it's not only the problem of the archaeologists. We have two different things. We have the direct access to the cave, but more and more is difficult. Then you have the copy of the caves, and hundreds of thousands of people are visiting with success. It's a good success, but at the same time in the society is very interested, and the young generation like the study of the past, like these images from the past, and it's a reason why there are new challenges in presenting rock art with the technology, with the 3D immersive video, with the tools, with the smartphone you have in your hand to present rock art. And it's important for archaeologists, for all the disciplines, for geomorphologists, paleontologists to work with art, to be associated with art, not to leave artists interpret themselves alone rock art or art. For example, I have just selected is the work of Justine Aymar in presenting in Paris some works. Since our first film in 2015, we have been embedded in cinema production about rock art. Here, for example, about the therianthropic representation, a sculpture, François Lelon has made a representation and presented them in different spaces in museum. Last month, you were in the Lateinium in Switzerland. A group of contemporary music is working on the idea of robots, animals, and representation here in Saclay, here in the Museum of Archaeology of, like the Paladru, for example. Here, Justine Aymar, working with a 3D model from the Choi Cave, with a partner of the Ministry of Culture, has made a network of neurons working for 1 year with a model of Chauvet. And the result, a long video and presentation, is really strange. For the first time you see and we discover other animal forms than terrestrial form from this world. There is a work here in presentation in a white surface in Grand Palais in Paris. And Oliver Beer, for example, has a work this year in the Fondegem cave. We will visit Fondegem, and maybe you will speak about his work, a resonance project. His sound is singing in the caves, but at the same time is looking at the concentration of the rock art. And the result on different wide screen is immersive presentation in the Fondegem cave. And this is important, this kind of presentation, because it's modern, it's very efficient for young people, and at the same time people are looking to the work in a specific context, ambiences, modernity. Another presentation, and it's the last, is in Brazil, an archaeological experience on some rock shelter named tocas. In tocas, there are engravings, painting, as in your countries, in this way, and a short presentation from slide has been made with a film. And this film presents the evolution, and it's made with modern music, with composition, and it's a specific film recently presented in the film festival in Cabaret. Thank you very much. I'm very short. I will be available for you all the days for the future. It's only a global presentation, but a lot of aspects may be different.